They say climate change is a global issue, something the entire world is responsible for. This is nothing but Western propaganda. For more than 2 centuries, they went on a pollution spree. Trains, factories, oil refineries, the West was a powerhouse of emissions. Most of the pollution we see today is from that era because climate change is not immediate. Today's pollution is building up for a disaster in the future. Not many people know this. We are told that every country is equally responsible. It's an excellent bit of propaganda, and we've been busting this. The big polluters must pay up. It starts with the United States and Europe. They polluted the world, and in the process, they made big money. But today, we have a new addition to the list, a country that is out-polluting the world, and that country is called China. This is what the greenhouse emissions from 2019 look like. China made up 27% of it. This is more than the United States, India, and the European Union and Japan put together. In fact, you can leave India out and add all the developed nations, and they would still fall short of China. So a couple of questions here. Where is China headed? Where does this leave the battle against climate change, and what role will the West play? Question number 1. Where is China headed? President Xi Jinping says China's emissions will peak by 2030. So to answer the question, China's emissions are heading up. In 2020, they surged 1.7%. Remember, this is during the pandemic when most of the world was locked down. Global emissions dropped, but China's emissions went up. What about per capita numbers? China usually scores well on that indicator. It helps when you have 1.4 billion people to share the massive load. But in 2019, that wasn't the case. The developed world reported 10.5 tons per capita. China came close with 10.1 tons. And to give you some context, they were at 7.18 tons in 2016. So the rise has been exponential for China. In the last 2 decades, Chinese per capita emission tripled. And if this trend holds, China will overtake the US before 2030. Where does this leave China's climate commitments? Peak emissions by 2030, net zero by 2050. That's what Xi Jinping has promised. But how realistic is this? Last year, Beijing cleared coal power projects worth $474 million. These are all investments outside China. What about inside the country? More than half the energy demand is still being met using coal in China. More than half. So Beijing is using the Western playbook. In fact, it is perfecting it, exporting pollution and at the same time burning coal at home. Question number 2. Where does this leave the battle against climate change? Chinese officials have ranked their priorities. Economic growth beats pollution. And on this, most of the developing world is in agreement. But China's pace is worrying. It makes up nearly 18% of the world population, 18% of the world population, but 27% of emission. A climate change conversation without China is pointless. And so far, they have promised a lot, but with China, we know promises do not matter. Which brings us to the third question we want to answer tonight. What can the West do? And to be honest, they have done enough damage. So it would be better for them to stay away. We are still paying for their centuries of pollution. Let me show you a graph. It shows cumulative emissions. Right from 1750 to 2019, the developed world is at 1,000 gigatons. What about China? Somewhere around 200. And that's how far ahead the West is. The developing world would take decades to catch up. But here's the thing, countries like India do not want to catch up. India is exploring green alternatives already, but China is steaming ahead with coal. There are 1,058 coal plants in the country in China. More than half the global capacity is in China. What about the Paris Accord goals? Climate trackers have called the progress highly insufficient. So that's where things stand at the moment. The West is still the big villain. They must foot the bill for reversing climate change, but China is fast catching up. And if they do not turn away from coal, you can add climate change to the list of things that China must pay for. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.